Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Bhagavatam. We continue with the Uddhava Gita. This is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, chapter number 15. In this chapter, Krishna is going to be talking about mystic yoga, the perfections of mystic yoga, and the absolute miracles that yogis are able to perform. But just for those of you that are still new out here, let's get you a little up to date. This is a conversation with Krishna and his dear friend Uddhava. Krishna, who we refer to as Bhagavan, the supreme person, the supreme being, the supreme personality of Godhead. And Bhagavatam begins with Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Bhagavan spoke. Bhagavan means the supreme being, the supreme Lord. Bhagavan Sri Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead, said, "My dear Uddhava, the mystic perfections of yoga are acquired by a yogi who has conquered his senses." So I want to have you focus on some of the words over here because, we're used to the modern day idea of yoga, not of what Krishna is about to describe, which is the traditional systems of yoga, the ancient systems of yoga that go back thousands of years, tens of thousands of years even. And what he's going to tell us is something that our modern day yoga studios, people with their Lululemon outfits, they've never even thought about what he's going to tell you. So you better pay attention now. So he says the qualifications for mystic yoga are that the yogi must first have conquered their senses. Jit Indriya. Jit means to win and Indriya means senses. So Jit Indriya must have studied the mind, Yuktasya, and conquered the breathing, Jit Shavasya. Shava means breath and Jit means win. So this winning of, conquering over the senses, the breath, and the mind is vital. Because one who hasn't done that cannot progress in yoga. And then, having studied the mind, one must fix one's mind on Krishna. Krishna is the object of meditation. Krishna is the object of all yogis. He says in the Bhagavad Gita, Yoginam api sarvesham madgaten antaratma. That the yogi who has worships me with love and devotion is the greatest of all. But at this point, he's going to describe the mystic yoga process. And in the mystic yoga process, there are many siddhis or perfections that a yogi is able to exhibit, many wonderful, miraculous deeds that are unheard of in today's time because very few people are able to do the process that he is now going to describe, which is why it's kind of been watered down and presented to people in a way that, well, it kind of gets them started, I guess, but it doesn't take them to the real deep significance and purpose of yoga, which is to become united with Krishna, to become united with him through love and devotion. So then Uddhava asks him, Krishna's friend asks him a question. He says, "My dear Achyuta," Achyuta means infallible one. Infallible means one who has no flaws, who makes no mistakes, who's infallible. In contrast, we are all fallible. Fallible means we make mistakes, we do stupid things, we are lazy and misguided in so many ways, and we don't even want to admit it. We want to think that we're perfect and wonderful and amazing and all of that. But Krishna is actually the one who is infallible, not us, none of us. All of us are flawed, all of us are fallible. He is the only infallible one. So he says, "My dear Achyuta, O infallible one, by what dharna, what process can siddhi or mystic perfection be achieved? And what is the nature of such perfection?" Right? So mystic perfection, we'll get to understand now what that is and what the different stages of that are, what the different elements of that. It's a very deep discussion. How many mystic perfections are there? How many siddhis are there? Please explain these things to me. Indeed, you are the bestower of all mystic perfections. So ultimately, when people think that they are mystics, mystical abilities are bestowed upon us. They're not because of our activities. In fact, everything about us is bestowed upon us, even the ability to breathe. We did not create the ability to breathe. We did not somehow manufacture it in our factories. Neither did we manufacture our hearts that pump away for 70, 80, 90, 100 years. And they do so quite amazingly. So these are gifts that are given to us, that are bestowed upon us. And so it is if you have superlative intelligence, if you're a genius of some sort, a musical genius or a scientific genius or whatever else, those are all bestowed upon you. And now there are these processes that are being described as mystic yoga perfections, which by doing certain sadhana, certain practices, one can elevate oneself even further. So Bhagavan Sri Krishna replied, the masters of the yoga system have declared that there are 18 types of mystic perfection or siddhis and meditation, of which 8 are primary, having their shelter in me, and 10 are secondary, appearing from the material mode of goodness. So 8 of them are primary, having their shelter in me, meaning that they are naturally part of who Krishna is. 10 of them are secondary because they're connected with the material modes of nature. They're connected with this earthly realm. In the purport, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains the word mat pradhana as follows. Krishna is naturally the shelter of the 8 primary mystic potencies and meditations which emanate from his personal energy, his personal potency. These siddhis or yogic perfections are fully developed only within Krishna. Others may be able to partially develop them to some degree or other. But Krishna has all the siddhis developed within him fully, completely. So they are not only within him, but they are also within his personal associates who automatically receive these wonderful potencies to execute their devotional service to him. So in other words, Krishna bestows all kinds of mystical abilities to his loved ones, to his personal associates. When materialistic persons mechanically acquire such potencies, the perfections awarded are of an inferior degree and are considered to be manifestations of Maya or illusion. So they're making a distinction. There is the spiritual version of these mystical powers or perfections, and there is the Mayic or the earthly or the human version of that, which is based on the 3 modes of nature. So the perfections awarded are of an inferior degree. So there is a superior nature of this, and there are the inferior types of manifestations of these yogic abilities. Now, among the 8 primary mystic perfections, 3 of them relate to one's own body, and they are known as, so there are 8 of them, and 3 of them pertain to the body, and they are known as Anima Siddhi, which means to become smaller than the smallest. Mahima Siddhi, which is becoming greater than the greatest, means bigger than the biggest. And Laghima Siddhi, becoming lighter than the lightest. Through the perfection of Prapti, so that's next one, Prapti Siddhi, one acquires whatever one desires. And through Prakamya Siddhi, one experiences any enjoyable object, either in this world or any other. Through Ishita Siddhi, one can manipulate the sub-potencies of Maya. We'll be discussing that later, so I'll explain it as we go along. Then through Vashita Siddhi, you become unaffected or unimpeded by the three modes of material nature. In other words, nature is no longer able to affect you in any way. And finally, one who has acquired Kama Vasayita Siddhi. Kama Vasayita Siddhi can obtain anything from anywhere to the highest possible limit. My dear gentle Uddhava, these 8 mystic perfections are considered to be naturally existing and unexcelled within this world. So they are naturally existing and unexcelled, meaning that they are unparalleled within this world. Through Anima Siddhi, in the purport it says, through Anima Siddhi one can become so small. So this was the first of the ones that we talked about. Let's go back over them again so you can see it. Through Anima Siddhi, one can become so small that one can enter a stone or pass through any obstacle. In other words, a wall even, or any other thing can pass right through even the densest substances. Through Mahima Siddhi, one becomes so great that one can cover everything. Through Laghima, one can become so light that one can ride on the sun's rays onto the sun planet. Through Prapti Siddhi, one can acquire anything from anywhere and can even touch the moon with one's finger. By this mystic perfection, one can also enter into the senses of any other living entity and thus utilize their senses. And in this way, one can acquire anything. Through Parakamya, one can experience any enjoyable object either in this world or any other. And through Ishita, or the controlling potency, one can manipulate the material sub-potencies of Maya. Through Vashita, or the power to control, one can bring others under one's control. Or through Vashita, keep oneself beyond the control of the modes of nature. Ultimately, one acquires through Kama Vashayita the maximum powers of control, acquisition, and enjoyment. The word Atpatika in this verse indicates being original, natural, and unexcelled. These 8 mystic potencies originally exist in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Being, Krishna, in the superlative degree. Krishna can become so small that he enters within the atomic particle. So this is a fact, and this is known to all of us, that these atomic particles they're actually particles and waves, and those waves are actually his energy, and he enters within each atomic particle in this way. He becomes smaller than the smallest, and he becomes so large that as Mahavishnu, he breathes out millions of universes. And he becomes so light or subtle that even great mystic yogis cannot perceive him. And his acquisitive power, ability to acquire things, is perfect because he keeps the total existence eternally within his body. So on one hand, he is in the smallest of the small, entering in every atom of the creation into the very fabric of the universe. And on the other hand, everything is contained within him. And on the other hand, he exists separate from it all. So if you find that hard to understand, of course, it is hard to understand. Our logical mind cannot comprehend such things. But it is the nature of reality. It is the nature of the ultimate reality, which is Sri Krishna. The Supreme Lord can enjoy whatever he likes, control all energies, dominate all persons, and exhibit complete omnipotency. Therefore, it is to be understood that these 8 mystic perfections are insignificant expansions of the mystic potency of the Supreme Lord, who in Bhagavad Gita is called Yogeshwara, the Supreme Lord of all mystic potencies. These 8 perfections are not artificial, but are natural and unexcelled because they originally exist in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. All right, with that we come to, so in other words, yogis are able to attain these, but at a lower level, not to the extent and not to the degree that Krishna is able to do that. So you've come across, there are many stories in the Bhagavatam, in the Krishna Leela, where they talk of Krishna's pastimes, and there are yogis who try at some point or other to attack him or his devotees. like in the case of the Rasa Muni and Ambrish Maharaj. So they're not able to. So we'll talk a little more about that as we go. So then there are what are called 10 secondary mystic perfections. Right? 10 of them. So we had 8 of the primary. Now we have the 10 secondary mystic perfections or siddhis. And they arise from the modes of nature. So they are more of the earthly plane. And they are the powers of freeing oneself from hunger and thirst and other bodily disturbances, hearing and seeing things that are far away, moving the body at the speed of the mind. By the way, speed of the mind is faster than the speed of light. Assuming any form one desires, entering the bodies of others, dying when one desires, witnessing the pastimes between the devas and the apsaras. The apsaras are the heavenly celestial girls, and the devas are the demigods. So being able to witness their pastimes, the things that they do, and completely executing one's determination and giving orders whose fulfillment is unimpeded. In other words, you say something is going to happen and it happens. That's how it is. So again, you might be getting a drift of what's going on out here, or maybe you're not. And I want you to think about it further. What these powers, if one had all these powers, what could one do? If you had all these powers, what could you do? Some of these powers cannot even be attained by any science that you know today. And some of these powers might be achieved by science. But all of these were attained not through creating labs and not through creating factories, but they were attained by simply through meditation. And through that inner development of one's being, one was able to attain all these mystical powers. The question is, what would you do with them? Just as today we struggle with the powers of, initially it was the nuclear, well, first it was before nuclear, there was even just the guns and gunpowder that was created. It was so destructive in nature. And yet it gave certain civilizations such great power that they went out and they conquered the world, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries. And then you have the power of the power of the nuclear and atom bombs and the havoc those created, and how everybody had to finally come to an understanding and how to rein in that power. And now we're coming to the power of AI, and God knows what that produces. So we are constantly unlocking powers that we have no idea how to control. Powers that can be extremely destructive if we don't know how to use them well. Likewise, the powers that can be unlocked within ourselves through the yogic process can also be very disruptive and selfish and harmful, or they may not. But they have the potency, the potential to be absolutely misused. Power in the wrong hands can and will be misused. Power, when it is too much, can get to one's ego and make one feel extremely unstoppable. And when that happens, it becomes disruptive to everyone. And then that kind of person or that kind of power needs to be stopped. So now we come, after we've done the 8 primary ones, the 10 secondary ones, we're coming to 5 more such yogic powers, which are called the 5 inferior perfections or siddhis. And these are the power to know past, present, and future. You might think, oh my gosh, what is inferior about this? This is huge. This is big. The tolerance of heat, cold, and other dualities. So you may have heard of yogis who are able to sit on snow and ice and meditate there for years on end. And the power to know the minds of others. Imagine if you had all these powers. The power to be unaffected by fire. That means fire cannot burn you, or the sun, or water, or poison. And finally, the power to remain unconquered by anyone. In other words, no one is able to defeat you in battle or war or anything like that. So, and these are considered the inferior ones. These constitute 5 perfections of the mystic process of yoga and meditation. Krishna says, I am simply listing these here according to their names and characteristics. Now, please learn from me how these specific mystic perfections arise and from specific meditations and also of the particular processes involved. So we'll begin with the first one, which is called Anima Siddhi, which is to become smaller than the smallest. So Krishna says, one who worships me in my atomic form, pervading all subtle elements, fixing his mind on that alone, obtains the mystic perfection called anima. In other words, if you were to meditate on the world around you, as people call it, the universe, and if you were to then realize that that supreme being, Krishna, is pervading this entire universe through his energy, and that he is present everywhere in everything, and you fix your mind on that alone, you may obtain the mystic perfection called anima. Anima refers to the mystic ability to make oneself smaller than the smallest and thus able to enter within anything. So, of course, you would be in a meditative state, and in that meditative state, you can enter anything, anywhere. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is within the atoms and atomic particles. And one who perfectly fixes his mind in that subtle atomic form of the Supreme Lord acquires the mystic potency called anima, by which he can enter even within the most dense matter, such as a stone. Then next is Mahima, one who absorbs his mind in the particular form of the Mahatattva, that is the universal form of Krishna, the gigantic, his presence everywhere as the universe, and thus meditates upon me as the supreme soul of the total material existence, achieves the mystic perfection called Mahima. By further absorbing the mind in the situation of each individual element, in others by focusing on the individual elements such as the sky, the air, fire, and so on, one progressively acquires the greatness of each material element. So people have asked sometimes the question, how does one levitate, for example? So it is by meditating on air that one acquires the quality of air and becomes light and is able to then levitate or even fly in some cases, or go and travel places where actually just leave and go anywhere one wants to. This again happens through meditation. In the purport, it said there are innumerable verses in Vedic literatures explaining that the Supreme Godhead, Sri Krishna, is qualitatively not different from his creation. So the creation, Prakriti, is no different than the Purusha, the creator. The creator and the creation are qualitatively not different. They have the same quality, the same energy. In other words, the entire creation is pervaded by Krishna. His energy is what pervades everything, and therefore the quality of this creation is no different than the person himself. So you may say, well, how is this? Well, I can tell you from practical experience that if you take the time to really be present with any aspect of material creation, the earth, water, trees, nature, any aspect of material creation, I don't mean things that have been cut off from there and turned into a table or some such thing. I mean nature in its natural state when it is alive and vibrant. You will notice that if you are very present to it, you will feel very peaceful. And it's not like you've done anything to be peaceful. You're just being present to whatever's around you, the ocean, the water, the sunshine, whatever it is that's around you in nature. If you slow down enough, and if you are present enough, you will enter into that energy and you will experience the blissfulness that is there. Sri Krishna is Sat Chit Ananda. He is eternal, full of knowledge, fully conscious, right? Chit and Ananda, blissful. you will feel that presence. It's not it's an experiment anyone can do, and it is a result anyone can experience. You don't have to be a great yogi for this. You simply need to know how to focus your mind and be present. It's a very basic, fundamental process. It's become very popular in today's time to talk of presence. Presence is just the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And yes, in that way you can prove the existence of God, because that existence is everywhere and it is peaceful and blissful, conscious, chit and ananda, and sat because it is eternal. You will feel a sense of timelessness. You will lose track of time. All three things will be experienced, and this can be done by anyone, any place in nature. So he says, a yogi can meditate upon the total material existence as a manifestation of the eternal potency of Bhagavan. Once the yogi has established his realization, then he obtains the perfection called Mahima Siddhi. By realizing the Supreme Lord's presence in each individual element, the yogi also acquires the greatness of each element. Then Krishna says, I exist within everything. I exist within everything, and I am therefore the essence of the atomic constituents of material elements. See, he exists within everything, and therefore he is the essence of the atomic constituents of material elements. By attaching his mind to me in this form, the yogi can attain the perfection called laghima, which means he realizes the subtle atomic substance of time. So now we've gone from the material elements and we moved into time. In the purport it is said, Srimad Bhagavatam elaborately explains that kala or time is the transcendental form of Bhagavan, of the Supreme Lord, that moves the material world. So it is time, in fact, right, that moves this material world. Krishna says, time I am, destroyer of worlds. Destroyer means because everything is over time is gradually degrading. Everything in this time is ashashvat, temporary, everything in this world. And over time, that temporary nature becomes exposed. Everything sort of crumbles into the dirt, into nothingness. And we're not talking about 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. It could be 50 years, 500 years, 5,000, 5 million years. Everything crumbles into nothingness, right? So time I am, destroyer of worlds. He didn't mean it the way was portrayed in the movie where they're trying to show the nuclear bomb and then equating the destruction that was caused by the nuclear bomb as being what Krishna is trying to say. No, he wasn't meaning it in the sense of nuclear bombs. He was referring to this verse where he says, time I am destroy worlds. He means that over time, everything gets destroyed in this world, including the world itself, including the universe itself. Ultimately, it is wound up, goes back to nothing, goes back into his body and into being nothingness for a while, and then again is remanifest again. And this goes on over millions of years. Since the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, are composed, or space, are composed of atoms, the atomic particles are the subtle substance or manifestation of the movements of time. The atomic particles are the subtle substance or manifestation of the movements of time. I don't know how to explain this one. And I think science has not been able to explain the correlation between time and all that exists, right? And the universe and all that exists out here, and the atoms and so on and so forth. So what is that correlation? Perhaps if any of you know, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Please enlighten me about that. More subtle than time is Bhagavan or Sri Krishna himself, who expands his potency as the time factor. By understanding all these things clearly, the yogi attains the Laghima Siddhi, the power to make himself lighter than the lightest. All right. So next we come to Prapti Siddhi. Fixing his mind completely in me within the element of false ego ahankar generated from the mode of goodness, the yogi obtains the power of mystic acquisition by which he becomes the proprietor of the senses of all living entities. He obtains such perfection because his mind is absorbed in me. It is significant that in order to acquire each mystic perfection, one must fix one's mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur states that those who pursue such perfection without fixing their mind on the Supreme Being acquire a gross and inferior reflection of each mystic potency. Because see, Krishna is the source of all these mystical powers. If you've heard about Christ walking on water, that's a yogic mystical potency. If you've heard of Sai Baba manifesting things out of thin air, that's a yogic mystical power. If you've heard of people being able to do any other miraculous deed, those are yogic mystical powers. Again, they can be used for the welfare of others, or they can be used or misused. And they are, in fact, the sort of place from which the yogi either falls down from their yogic platform or begins to think of themselves as great and elevates themselves to the position of God, or if they don't do it, their followers do it, because people are so taken in by mystical powers. People are so mystified by mystical powers that they think that someone who has mystical powers, someone who can do some miracles, is God. That is not the case. If someone wants to claim to be God, then that person needs to create universes, not just produce a watch or heal the sick or bring a dead person back to life. These are things that are part of mystical powers. And that's all right. They can be used for good, as in the examples I gave. But that doesn't make the person God. When you see with Krishna, he is and so many of those powers. If you read his Leela and his pastimes, you will come across so many of these powers that he's exhibiting. Where he's going, he's going under the ground water. He's traveling to outer space. He's, destroying the people who have come to attack him with thousands of weapons and all kinds of stuff. He just exhibits mystical powers all the time, and all these different powers are exhibited by him, even in his presence on earth when he was here over 5,000 years ago. So all these powers, in fact, come from him. And if you try to get them without including him in your sadhana, in your meditation, then you will get some inferior version of this. And that inferior version will often be laced with ahankar or ego and will become your downfall. Be very aware of that. One who concentrates their mental activities in me as the Paramatma, the super soul, of that phase of the Mahatattva which manifests the chain of karmic activities, obtains from me, whose appearance is beyond material perception, the most excellent mystic perfection called prakamya. So, one who meditates on Krishna as the Paramatma, the super soul, Paramatma, the presence of God within each of us, which manifests of that aspect of the Mahatattva of the creation, which manifests the chain of karmic activities, obtains from me, whose me is Krishna saying, whose appearance is beyond material perception. What does he obtain? The most excellent mystic perfection called prakamya. All right, what is this? Srila Veera Raghava Acharya explains the word sutra or thread is used to indicate that the Mahatattva, that is the entire universal creation, sustains one's karmic activities just as the thread sustains a row of jewels. Thus, by fixed meditation on Bhagavan, who is the soul of the Mahatattva, one can achieve most excellent perfection called prakamya. the Supreme Being appears from the avyakta, or the spiritual sky, or that his birth is avyakta, beyond the perception of material senses. Unless one accepts his transcendental form, there is no possibility of obtaining prakamya, or any other genuine mystic perfection. Again, it is by meditating on He who is beyond material creation, whose form is transcendental, whose nature, whose name, whose pastime, his lila, everything is transcendent, that beyond this world. And it is by meditating on Him who is the possessor of these qualities that they actually come into oneself. I've often said, in a more negative light, if you meditate on someone's flaws, those flaws will come into you. If you criticize them, if you judge them, if you hate them, those things that you hate about that person become such an intense meditation that those qualities will now come within you. Similarly, if you meditate upon the qualities of God, of that Supreme Being, of Krishna, then those qualities will come within you. And you won't even have to ask for them. You won't have to pursue them separately or individually. As needed, they will come within you. Now we come to the next siddhi called Ishita. One who places his consciousness on Vishnu, the Supersoul, the prime mover and the supreme lord of the external energy, consisting of three modes, obtains the mystic perfection of controlling other conditioned souls, their material bodies, and their bodily designations. I'm sorry, let's just take a moment to look at this. Okay, we're on Ishita, right. So, very important that this is such a heady experience. Imagine being able to control other person, their material body, or their a sense of who they are. It can be so manipulative, and it can be so abused easily. And the purport said we should remember that mystic perfection never enables a living entity to challenge the supremacy of the Supreme Lord, Bhagavan. In fact, one cannot obtain such perfections without His mercy. Thus, one's controlling power can never disturb His plan. So if you are trying to impose upon try to control them in some way that is against the plan of God, it will backfire on you. One is allowed to exhibit mystic control only within the confines of the law of God. And even a great yogi who transgresses that law by so-called mystic opulences will be severely punished, as was revealed in the story of Durvasa Muni cursing Ambarish Maharaj. Durvasa Muni was a great yogi, had mystical powers, incredible mystical powers. He was also had a certain pride, a certain arrogance, and a lot of anger. And there was this great devotee of Krishna called Ambarish, King Ambarish. And there's a long story about that which we've covered in the Bhagavatam. But a small action performed by King Ambarish where he had to break a fast, and Durvasa took offense at that you have disrespected me because you broke your fast before even offering me anything. This is disrespectful to a guest, disrespectful to a sadhu or a saintly person who has come to your home, and it is against the Vedic system. And so he cursed Ambarish and tried to kill him through the creation of a demonic entity. And the result of that was the devotee Ambarish, King Ambarish, who was protected by Krishna, by Vishnu. Vishnu's Sudarshan Chakra, which moves rapidly, first destroyed that demon and then began to chase Durvasa, the great yogi. And it chased him throughout the universe. Durvasa fled. He had the power to travel to all the different planets of the universe seeking help. And no one could help him, not Brahma, not Shiva, no one, and not even Vishnu, whose Sudarshan Chakra it is. The disc belongs to Vishnu. He says, I cannot help you either. You have to go back to King Ambarish and apologize to him. You have offended my devotee. and only He can forgive you. So then the yogi Durvasa came back to King Ambarish and fell at his feet and begged his forgiveness. And then only did the Sudarshan Chakra leave him alone, or it would have killed him. So, side note there. The yogi who places his mind in my form as Narayan, known as the fourth factor, full of opulences, becomes endowed with my nature and thus attains the mystic perfection called Vashita. So Vashita Siddhi causes one to become unaffected or unimpeded by the three modes of nature. How does one do that? By meditating on form of Narayan, which is known as the fourth factor, full of all opulences, and then he becomes endowed with the nature of that Supreme Being. So in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Tribhair gunamayir bhavair ebhai sarvam idam jagat mohitam na bhijanati mam ebhya param avyayam. Deluded by the three modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, the whole world does not know me, Krishna is saying, who am above the modes of nature and inexhaustible, unlimited. So Krishna is not affected by the influence of this world. The modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance affect every one of us in varying degrees. But Krishna is beyond the modes of nature, unaffected by this world, and he's inexhaustible, it's unlimited. We are limited. The Supreme Lord is called Turiya, or the fourth factor, because there are three modes of nature, but he is the fourth factor. One can obtain the mystic opulence, Vashita, or freedom from the modes of nature, by meditating upon him as Turiya, the fourth factor, beyond the influence of the modes of nature. Ultimately, everything depends on his favor. One fixes his pure mind on me in my manifestation as the impersonal Brahman. So now there is the personal presence of God as a being, but then there is the impersonal presence of God, which is spread everywhere, of which everything is made. So if one fixes one's mind on Krishna, or the Supreme Being, in his manifestation as that impersonal energy, right? And one obtains the greatest happiness, wherein all his desires are completely fulfilled. So in the purport it is said, Param Ananda, or the greatest happiness, here indicates the greatest material happiness. It is clearly stated in Srimad Bhagavatam that a devotee has no personal desire or kama. One who has personal desire is certainly on the material platform. And for such a person, the greatest happiness of kama vashayita siddhi, or the perfection of completely obtaining anything that one desires. So let's talk about this a little bit. So one who meditates on the impersonal Brahman obtains great happiness, wherein all his desires are completely fulfilled. Right? So what does this mean? See, we are all driven by desire. Everything we want is driven by desire, including our search for happiness or love or peace or any of those things that we want. All of these things are actually not material in nature. Nothing material can give you peace. Nothing material can actually give you happiness, and nothing and no one material of this world can give you love. I know it's a big claim, and we can absolutely discuss it if you like. But let's move on. So none of these things, because these are all spiritual things, they're all transcendent, they're beyond this world. They come from the Supreme Being or God. And because they come from Him, they can only be obtained by being in connection with Him. They cannot be obtained from the world, no matter how hard you try. You try and try and try for lifetime after lifetime, but you will not get them. So he says, one who has one who has achieved the place of Param Ananda, the great bliss that comes from meditating upon the Parabrahman, meditating upon that Supreme Being who is present everywhere. When you recognize that He is present here as energy, and you meditate upon that energy in the form of this universe, it's not enough to just say the universe. But what is the universe? Is it just a bunch of objects, of planets floating in space? No, it's the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Being, Sri Krishna, manifest as his energy, which then takes various shapes and forms. And if you can look past those shapes and forms and feel and experience that energy through meditation, then you enter into the realm of blissfulness. Because your desires are completely fulfilled then. When you have that Supreme Being and you experience him in any way, whether it's in the form of his deity or in the form of the energy or in the form of his name, however you experience him and recognize it is him, you're not in some kind of a denial, then you experience this great bliss. And this great bliss, Param Ananda, right, fills you in such a way that nothing ever has up till that point. Nothing ever fulfilled you in this way. And that fulfillment is what we all seek. And that fulfillment is easily and effortlessly obtained if one simply comes to the place where instead of trying to accumulate things and instead of trying to work so hard for material gain and fulfilling one's desires in this world, that one simply comes to that Supreme Being with no personal desire or karma and surrenders oneself. And it's the easiest way to get there. And that way one obtains the greatest happiness. Kama vasayata siddhi, or the perfection of completely obtaining anything that one desires. If you have the Supreme Being Krishna, then you have everything. And if you have everything, you want for nothing. It's a simple equation. Then he says, Krishna says here, a human being who concentrates on me as the upholder of dharma, of religious principles, the personification of purity, and the Lord of Shvetadvip, obtains the pure existence in which he is freed from the 6 waves of material disturbance, namely hunger, thirst, decay, death, grief, and illusion. Imagine being freed of these 6 things. These are the great material disturbances. Hunger, no longer being troubled by hunger, or by thirst, or by decay, as in old age, or by death, or by grief, or by illusions of any kind. Being free of all that. How does one do it? By recognizing Sri Krishna as the upholder of dharma, right? The personification of purity and the Supreme Lord of all that is. That's simple as that. So now you see in the purport it explains, Krishna now begins to explain the processes for obtaining the 10 secondary mystic perfections derived from the modes of nature. Within the material world, Vishnu is addressed here as Shvetadvip Pati, the Lord of Shvetadvip. This is where he resides. Vishnu within each universe is a form of Vishnu and a form of Shiva and a form of Brahma. So in the universe, there is a place called Shvetadvip, called the White Ocean. And that when you recognize that he governs the material modes of goodness and is thus called Shuddha and Dharmamaya, or the personification of purity and piety. By worshipping Vishnu as the personification of material goodness, one obtains the material benediction of freedom from bodily disturbance. So simply by recognizing it as the source of all goodness, material goodness. He is the personification of material. Vishnu is the one in charge of Sattva Gun. Sattva Gun is the mode of goodness. Brahma is in charge of Rajagun, the mode of passion, because he creates. And Shiva is in charge of Tamogun, which is because he's in charge of the destruction of the universe. So Vishnu maintains in the mode of goodness. He is situated in the mode of goodness always. Although in the spiritual world, he is in the mode of transcendent goodness, Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness. In fact, he's always in that state. So by worshipping him as the personification of the mode of goodness, one obtains the material benediction of freedom from bodily disturbance. So actually one who has deeply immersed themselves in worshipping that Supreme Being begins to experience this freedom from bodily disturbance. Krishna then continues, that purified living entity who fixes his mind on the extraordinary sound vibrations occurring within me. Okay, there are extraordinary sound vibrations existing within him. One of them is the syllable Om. But then he goes further. As the personified sky and total life air, Pran, such a person is able to perceive within the sky the speaking of all living entities. The purport explains, speech occurs by vibrating air within the sky. So within space, you vibrate air. One who meditates on the Supreme Lord as the personified sky and air thereby acquires the ability to hear that which is vibrated at a great distance. The word prana indicates that the Supreme Lord is the personified life air of the individual living entities and the total aggregate of life forms. Krishna continues, merging one's sight into the sun planet and then the sun planet into one's eyes, one should meditate on me as existing within the combination of sun and vision. Thus one acquires the power to see any distant thing. So now you've got the power to hear far away things. Maybe it could be even things that are far away, like thousands of miles away. Or be able to see things that are thousands of miles away, like similar to what is called remote viewing. Then he says, the yogi who completely absorbs his mind in me and who then makes use of the wind that follows the mind to absorb the material body in me obtains through the potency of meditation on me the mystic perfection by which his body immediately follows his mind wherever it goes. In other words, you can literally travel at the speed of mind. Purport is written, Tad Anuvayuna indicates that the particular subtle air that follows the mind, this pran that follows the mind, when the yogi merges this pran with the body and mind in Krishna, by the potency of meditation on him, his gross material body, physical material body, like the subtle air, can follow the mind anywhere. In other words, you can physically be present anywhere. This perfection is called manojavaha. Then Krishna continues, when the yogi applying his mind in a certain way desires to assume a particular form, that very form immediately appears. In other words, you can change form at will. Such perfection is possible by absorbing the mind in the shelter of my inconceivable mystic potencies by which I assume innumerable forms. See, Krishna is taking all these forms, all the bodies you see around you, all the animals, all the bees, all the birds, all the insects, and all the humans. These are all different forms that he has taken. And yet he has his own unique original form as well. So it's not that these forms are all that he is. He's not the sum total of all these forms that you see around you, nor is he the sum total of the universe. He is all of this and much more. The perfect yogi desires to enter another body, he should meditate upon himself within the other body. And then giving up his own physical body, he should enter the other's body through the pathways of air as easily as a bee leaves one flower and flies into another. Purport, as the air is inhaled into the body through the nostrils and mouth, similarly the life air of the yogi's subtle body travels through the pathways of external air and easily enters into the body of another person, just as the bee easily flies from flower to flower. One may admire a heroic man or beautiful woman and desire to experience life within their extraordinary material body. Such opportunities are available through the mystic perfection called Parakaya Praveshanam. Pure devotees being absorbed in meditation upon the supreme spiritual form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are not actually attracted by any material body. Thus, the devotees remain transcendental and satisfied on the platform of eternal life. So, yogis are able to do this. They can actually go and enter into the body of any person anywhere in the world or in the universe for that matter and be able to experience what that person is experiencing. But this invasion of another person's privacy, I guess, this invasion of another person's being, I'm sure would be considered extremely inappropriate. And yet, if a yogi misuses their power, they might do that. However, the true use of that might be where let's say, a guru is able to know exactly what his disciple is doing and might be able to thereby understand the extent of that person's devotion or the extent to which they need correction And in that way, it can be very constructive. Your guru is able to understand the mind of his disciple and is able to guide him better. That's a constructive use of this. So one has to know that these siddhis come with a very heavy responsibility. And if misused, not only does one lose the siddhi, but one loses all one's spiritual advancement. You see, if you go and you invade other people's bodies and mind, and you start now either trying to control them or influence them or just spy upon them, that kind of misuse of yogic power will cause one to become asuric or demonic and therefore lose all one's yogic powers. This is not the activity of a godly person. That kind of misuse is not acceptable in any dharmic way, in any religious, righteous way that follows the path of dharma. The yogi who has achieved the mystic perfection called Swachhanda Mrityu blocks the anus with the heel of the foot and then lifts the soul from the heart to the chest, to the neck, and finally to the head, situated within the Brahmarandra. The yogi then gives up his material body and guides the soul to the selected destination. So one can leave one's body at will, and one can choose where one wants to go at the end of this body. In the purport, it is explained this mystic opulence of Swachandu Mrityu, or dying at will, was wonderfully exhibited by Bhishma Dev. Bhishma was the grandfather of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and was at the end of his life in the battle of Kurukshetra. He was laying like this on a bed of arrows, and he stayed there for many days, choosing the time of his death perfectly. At the most auspicious time, then he left his body at that time. Meanwhile, he was able to instruct Yudhishthir, he was able to spend time with Krishna, and he was able to leave in the most perfect way that a yogi would leave his body. Even though he was a warrior, a great warrior. The yogi who desires to enjoy in the pleasure gardens of the devas, the demigods, should meditate on the purified mode of goodness, which is situated within me, Krishna says. So what happens then? Then the heavenly women, the apsaras, generated on the mode of goodness, will approach him in airplanes. Of course, many yogis have been approached by such apsaras, and they have often fallen down from their yogic trance and become distracted and given up their vows of celibacy and fallen down. Many tales about that. A yogi who has faith in me, absorbing his mind in me, and knowing that my purpose is always fulfilled, will always achieve his purpose by the very means he has determined to follow. So in the purport, it is said Krishna is called Satya Sankalpa, or he whose desire, intention, purpose, or resolve always comes to pass. See, a yogi who has attained this kind of perfection can also have that person, what they desire will come to pass. What they intend, what their purpose is, what their resolve is will come to pass. Because they are so clear in their thinking, they are so clear in their meditation and in their devotion and in their surrender, that nature supports them to make sure that whatever the purpose is will come to pass. The example may be given of Srila Prabhupada, who at the age of 70 came to America and brought with him this message of Krishna consciousness and spread throughout the world like wildfire. 108 temples in the 10 years that he was alive, and that he between the age of 70 to 80 before he passed away. And tens of thousands of people who took to this Krishna consciousness. How? Miraculous. The person who perfectly meditates on me acquires my nature. So what is he talking about? Meditating on himself. The person who perfectly meditates on me acquires my nature of being the supreme ruler and controller. His order, like mine, can never be frustrated by any means. So what Krishna is saying here is that when one deeply meditates on him, surrenders to him, right, recognizes his nature as the supreme ruler and controller, then such a person's wish, their desire, their order can never be frustrated by any means. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita Maya dakshena prakriti suyate sachara charam hetunanena kaunteya jagad viparivartate. This material nature is working under my direction and is producing all moving and non-moving beings. By its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So the nature is working under Krishna's control and is creating, and everything is created and destroyed again and again by material nature. He himself is not doing anything. He has set it up in such a way that it can work perfectly under his direction, of course. So after explaining the 8 primary and 10 secondary mystic perfections of yoga, now Krishna explains the 5 inferior potencies. What are those? A yogi who has purified his existence by devotion to me and who thus expertly knows the process of meditation obtains knowledge of past, present, and future. He can therefore see the birth and death of himself and others. Just as the bodies of aquatics cannot be injured by water, similarly the body of a yogi whose consciousness is pacified by devotion to me and who is fully developed in yoga science cannot be injured by fire, sun, water, poison, and so forth. And we see this in the examples of Prahlad and of Mira. So the purport says the creatures dwelling in the ocean are never injured by water. Rather, they enjoy life within the watery medium. Similarly, for one skilled in the techniques of yoga, fending off attacks by weapons, fire, poison, and so on is recreational activity. Prahlad was attacked by his father in all these ways, but because of his perfect Krishna consciousness, he was not injured. The pure devotees of Krishna depend fully upon his mercy. Upon the mercy of Sri Krishna, who possesses mystic opulences to an infinite degree and is therefore known as Yogeshwar, the master of all mystic power. Because devotees are always connected to Krishna, they do not feel any need to separately develop powers already possessed unlimitedly by their Lord and Master and Protector. If a human being falls into the middle of the ocean, quickly drowns, whereas the fish enjoy happiness sporting in the same wave. Similarly, the conditioned souls have fallen into the ocean of material existence and are drowning in the reactions to their karmic activities. Whereas the devotees of Krishna recognize this world to be the external potency of the Supreme Lord, and they enjoy pleasurable pastimes within it by fully engaging in his loving service. Krishna then continues, my devotee becomes unconquerable by meditating on my opulent incarnations, which are decorated with Shrivasta and various weapons and are endowed with imperial paraphernalia, such as umbrellas and fans. A learned devotee who worships me through yoga meditation certainly obtains in all respects the mystic perfections that I have described. For a sage who has conquered his senses, breathing and mind, who is self-controlled and always absorbed in meditation on me, what mystic perfection could possibly be difficult to achieve? In the purport, Srila Sridhar Swami comments as follows. Krishna here expresses that there is no need to practice many different processes. For by completely carrying out even one of the above-mentioned procedures, one controls one's senses, becomes absorbed in him, and thus achieves all mystic perfection. Srila Jiva Goswami notes that one must meditate on the transcendental form of the Lord, which is free from any material designation. This is the essence of advancing in the yoga system. Thus one acquires all mystic perfections very easily from the personal form, the personal body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Learned experts in devotional service state that the mystic perfections of yoga that I have mentioned, Krishna is speaking now, are actually impediments. Krishna is saying here, learned experts in devotional service, in bhakti state, that the mystic perfections of yoga that I have mentioned are actually impediments and are a waste of time for one who is practicing the supreme yoga by which one achieves all perfection in life directly from me. This verse is extremely important to understand. It is very similar to verses in the Bhagavad Gita where he said the same thing. That of all yogis, yoginam api sarvesham madgaten antaratmana, one who follows my gati, my path, right? Shraddhavan, one who has got full faith. Shraddha. Shraddhavan bhajati, who worships me. Yo mam, right? Me, mam, me. Same yukta matahat. Such a yogi is to be considered the greatest of all. Simply by their devotion, by their love. Love is what conquers God. And by that love, his qualities come within the devotee. And by that love, by the purity of that love, not when there is any agenda. Purity means that I want nothing from you, my dear Krishna. I want only you. I don't seek any relief from any suffering that I may be going through. I seek only you. When it is pure like that, anya abhilashita shunyam. Shunya means zero. And when there is no abhilasha, no desire, anya meaning any, there is no desire for anything from him. There is no agenda by which you have come to him. Oh, make me well again. Oh, give me this. I've lost my job. Can you help me get my job back? No, nothing. Whatever you have given me, whether good or bad, I submit. I take it as your will. I ask you for nothing else except you. When you can do that and want him above all else, then the earth, the universe is your oyster, is yours to be had. Everything is yours because everything is his. When you are his, then everything that is there in this universe is yours because everything is his. And the purport, it is said, is in common sense that whatever is a useless waste of time, what should be given up. Therefore, one should not pray to God for mystic yoga perfections. For a pure devotee of Krishna, who has no material desire, even impersonal liberation is a useless disturbance in his life. What to speak of the material perfections of yoga, which cannot even be compared to impersonal liberation. Such mystic perfections may be wonderful for an immature and inexperienced person, but they are not impressive for a learned person who has understood Krishna. Simply by obtaining Krishna, one dwells within an infinite ocean of mystic opulences. Therefore, one should not waste time pursuing separate mystic perfections. Krishna continues. Whatever mystic perfections can be achieved by good birth, herbs, austerities, and mantras can all be achieved by bhakti, by devotional service to me. Indeed, one cannot achieve the actual perfection of yoga by any other means. In the purport, it is said, by taking birth as a deva or a demigod, one is automatically endowed with many mystic perfections. Simply by birth on Siddhalok, one automatically acquires all of the 8 principal perfections of yoga. Similarly, by birth as a fish, one becomes invulnerable to water. By birth as a bird, one gets the mystic perfection of flying, and by birth as a ghost, on becoming a ghost, one gets the mystic perfection of disappearing and entering into the bodies of others. Patanjali, the creator of Patanjali Yoga, Patanjali Muni states that the mystic perfections of yoga can be achieved by birth, herbs, austerities, and mantras. Krishna here states, however, that such perfections are ultimately a waste of time and an impediment to achieving the actual perfection of yoga, which is Krishna consciousness. Those who claim to be yogis but pursue the satisfaction of their own senses are called ku-yogis or bhogi-yogis. Such ku-yogis cannot understand that just as they have tiny senses, the absolute truth, Supreme Being, Sri Krishna, has absolute senses. Nor can they understand that yoga is actually meant to satisfy the absolute senses of the Supreme Lord. By meditating exclusively on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can achieve yoga gati, the ultimate goal of yoga, which means living on Krishna's planet and there enjoying spiritual opulences along with him. Krishna continues, my dear Uddhava, I am the cause, the protector, and the Lord of all mystic perfections, of the yoga system, of analytic knowledge, jnana, of pure activity, of karma, and of the community of learned Vedic teachers. Just as the same material elements exist within and outside of all material bodies, similarly, I cannot be covered by anything else. In other words, he can never be covered by matter. He is always transcendent, always spiritual. I exist within everything as the Paramatma or Super Soul, and outside of everything in my all-pervading feature of Brahman. He is not polluted by his presence in the world. He is not polluted by his presence within each of us. So even though that person may be engaged in wrong or sinful activities, he remains always pure and perfect within that person. And whenever that person is ready to turn to him, that person then transforms and comes back to him one day. So with that, we end this chapter of the Bhagavatam and the Uddhava Gita. And we will continue with the Uddhava Gita in the upcoming episodes as well. All right, so with that, I will see you next week. Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.